Ladies and gentlemen, this is League for Republic Democracy of Australia. League for Republic Democracy of Australia. I am Chief President Harry J. Stiller, the LFDRA League for Republic Democracy of Australia. Just recently on what the Labor Party and the Liberal Party and the Justice Minister has said recently regarding a few things within Australia and what happens every time the Labor votes up and the Liberal votes down. I am Chief President Harry J. Stiller of the LFDRA. Age pensions and other pensions after slavery entrapment in Australia and other events, the current legal system in Australia says they will say to you that you won't be able to travel and visit other countries on the planet for 3 to 6 months as you used to be able to, until that law was changed that on a pension within Australia, you could travel to other countries across the planet of the earth for 3 to 6 months. And now if you're on a slavery entrapped student or recently unemployed or other allowance, when you leave Australia, any allowance will end. And pensioners that have worked their whole lives in slavery entrapment, left with nothing, are now only able to leave Australia for a month and receive a pension after making other private businesses millions and billions within Australia. And not paying someone else, and this is on welfare. If you're not currently in Australia, if you're not paying someone else's homeless rental investment exploit off, that ministry within Australia, those Australians living below the poverty line and other entrapped Australians in slavery that end up losing employment, that's very little below poverty. It's a very little payment in Australia. Under an LFDRA government, we'll give an extra 2 times $100 notes for all payments in Australia in the welfare policy, as well as the complementary 3-bedroom homes, and raising the federal minimum to the $79,000 with the 15% superannuation and the ABNS number. So, for example, if you're on a welfare payment in Australia currently, the current Australian government says if you're not paying a homeless rental investment exploit off, you get very little below poverty in Australia and other slavery entrapment rates and employment in Australia in other slavery entrapment measures in Australia, such as the Australian Parliament and staffers of the Liberal Party created slavery entrapment and aged care in Australia through a federal government-based training package for below poverty line slavery entrapped Australians to basically work as poverty entrapped slaves in aged care for nothing, and then end up with flat rate slavery entrapment rate of pay under the current Australian Parliament. That destroyed care quality in Australia by the Australian Parliament for cost-cutting slavery entrapment and reduction in quality for shareholders and investors in poverty aged care sector in Australia. And to add, my great-grandfather had his legs cut off and he was being tortured every day by aged care, and they could not even give him his legs. So we see tobacco and alcohol impulse marketing at airports around the planet. We see many airlines spam emails from communication businesses such as Telecom that went Telstra, then went private shares with an extra $40 billion spend that they will most likely just extort back and then make private shares that all they did was use foreign contractors to install it to begin with. So we spent $40 billion on what they called the National Broadband Network, and all they did was, we saw with Telecom that went Telstra, that then went private shares, and then all we're going to see here is just most likely we'll just see private shares, and all the current Liberal Party government did was used foreign contractors to install it. So yet again, Australians are left with poverty, slavery, entrapment rates of pay in Australia under the current Liberal Party, ALP and National parties and others. And the way they all vote, that in no way, shape or form is doing what's right for the people of Australia. Whenever the ALP, the Australian Labor Party, is up in paid opinion marketing polls, they get hypocritical. We saw under the Julia Gillard Rudd government that Australians could, pensioners that had been enslaved in slavery all their lives in Australia before they received a pension because superannuations and all the insurance extortions and costs of living in Australia, and the government said, no, sorry, but you can't travel to other countries after you've worked the whole life on the pension for 3 to 6 months while we pay you. Now, if you leave Australia, you get nothing and can only do that for a month before you'll never be allowed. If you're ever unemployed or wanting to study, you'll never be allowed to do that. So in what the ABC reported earlier, that there's an absolute wide travel ban on any poverty and trapped Australian that's not paying off someone's homeless rental investment exploit off. And this is true. Whenever the ALP is up in paid opinion marketing polls, they get hypocritical and always backflip on doing what's right. And the Liberal, Labor and National parties, including the Greens, have never done what's right for the people of Australia and their staffers. Scott Morrison announced $1 billion plus for a murderous, torturous, mind control, chemical weaponry gulags, weaponry warfare in Australia. Life of a murderous, Fed-funded, state-extorted chemical warfare rampage as seen by Stalin Russia, by ideologues, paper circulation and slavery entrapment. Then you will be left with nothing, with one of planet Earth's worst human rights abuses and misuse of trust under an ALP, a Liberal Party, a National Party and the Greens. Under an LFDRA government, we will ensure to do what's right for the people of Australia. So under an LFDRA government, $333,000 per complementary 3-bedroom home with ownership title documents and a tax rate of 8.5 percentage points for all Australians. That, in other economic terms, is including a $3,300 $100 note print per complementary 3-bedroom homes with ownership title documents and solar power 8 kilowatt household generation allowance, and raising the federal minimum Australia-wide for all Australian citizens under an LFDRA government in Australia. Also ending slavery entrapment with a wage minimum in Australia set at $79,000 per year with 4 weeks paid holiday and 12 personal days a year in federal legislature first sitting date and Fair Work Commission follow-up compliance and $50,000 fines per minute any employee in Australia is underpaid Australian minimum, and creation of ABNS numbers for self-managed superannuation investments or accrual, including traineeships and apprenticeships in Australia, and superannuation rates as a federal minimum of 15% on top of the $79,000 per year with an 8.5% tax rate. Long live a planet free from slavery entrapment and Scott Morrison's Liberal and Labor Party murderous chemical warfare rampage on Australians. Like I said, free from Liberal, Labor and National parties in Australia and negligent governments to the Constitution that always misuse and abuse the trust of the people. Like I said earlier, whenever the ALP is up in paid opinion marketing polls, they get hypocritical and always backflip on doing what's right. And the Liberal, Labor and National parties, including the Greens, have never done what's right for the people of Australia, including the human rights abuse and misuse under Liberal, Labor and National Party and the Greens and their staffers. Under an LFDRA government in Australia, we will phase out state sectional driver's licences with Australia-wide driver's licensing centres. Like I said in the other broadcast, victimisation has occurred for too many productive Australians commuting safely to and from work within Australia, and including international law licences that drive on the same side of the road as Australians and other Australia-wide road users. With a new Australia-wide driver's licensing centres, Australia-wide, governed by a MyGov service delivery platform, with the new Australia-wide licensing centres, ending the vicious victimisation of productive Australians commuting safely to and from work, as well as phasing out oil, refined and ethanol fuels by 2020. We will also have the MyGov service delivery platform with Australia First number plates, with cost of print of plate with lifetime registrations under that platform for Australians under an LFDRA government in Australia. Also ending the vicious victimisation on productive Australians. We will also spend $200 billion on education in Australia under an LFDRA government in Australia. Also ensuring any dual Japanese or other Japanese are registered with alien registration cards as the Japanese do to all foreigners in their country. We will also spend $150 million on a referendum on medical and medicinal forms of cannabis and registering strain strength with glass jar, paper bags and tongs dispensaries as seen in Canada and California, while registering strain strength and all of that. I am Chief President Harry J. Stiller of the LFDRA League for Republic Democracy of Australia. Please do nominate and vote for your LFDRA candidates in Australia, and long live Republic of Australia.